Okay, do we see the screen?
Yes.
Picture of a fisherman with a climate resilience at work.
Yep.
Fantastic, great. Um, well, thank you again for having me at Terra.do. Appreciate the chance to chat to you guys. Um, as Nicole was saying in the intro, I want to talk a little bit about the work I've done in the climate resilience space, but primarily how it reaches down onto the ground, right? The issue we hear time and time again is not seeing the actual impacts on the ground, the financing reaching down to the ground, the sort of the variable and tangible impacts, positive impacts on communities. And this is what PAC does. So just very quickly on where I work. I work for a medium-sized NGO, perhaps a little bit smaller now these days, given all the woes in the space. But we work in the community engagement space across many different disciplines, governance, health, responsible mining, and myself working in the environment and clean energy space. And all the work that we do is predicated on engaged communities and then co-developing solutions with them and for them. And so the work that I'll talk about, there'll be some that comes from the work I did prior to PACT, but a lot of it will be based on the work we've been doing with the communities around the world. With that, just let me move forwards to the slides. So why are they moving? Okay, here we go. So we hear a lot in the climate space, the fact that there's not enough money to go around to budget and funding to be able to make the positive change we want to see in the world. The numbers drastically go from the 200 billion per year to the $1 trillion, but suffice to say, a lot of funding is required to do what we want to do in this space to ensure that communities are resilient and adapting to the climate impacts. So finance is definitely a big constraint. And so we look to the private sector for this. Private sector has been said to be sort of not necessarily the silver bullet, but definitely a partner that needs to step up to be able to make these ends meet. And this is what PACT has been doing of late. We had a whole large USAID project, Green Invest Asia, focused in Southeast Asia, as the name indicates. But we also did some work in Indonesia, specifically on a bilateral project. And it was all about supporting businesses to green their supply chains, to develop sort of cleaner production methods, and be more investable in the eyes of green finance. And they're seeing this as being good business, climate resilience being good business, not about corporate social responsibility, not about just doing what investors are wanting to see, but they're starting to realize that infusing climate resilience aspects into their business, into their supply chains, into value chains, is not just about mitigating risks. Of course, it is primarily that, but there are advantages in terms of opportunity costs, cutting costs, increasing revenue, and ultimately being more competitive compared to their competition in this space. And so in Indonesia, for example, as you see in this picture, this is a palm oil producer, or in this case, at least palm nut transporter in Sumatra. And what we were doing is working with local Indonesian businesses to green their production methods. In this case, it was about bringing in cleaner fuels for their green mills to be able to mill the palm into palm oil. And in that way, being able to be able to attract this green finance, this climate finance that we know there's a lot of floating around. But the problem is being able to bring it down to the ground level for smaller investment ticket sizes. Often they're looking for in the 20 to $50 million ticket sizes, but these enterprises are looking for perhaps $500,000, $1 million, maximum $3 million. And so we're working with them to de-risk that investment in the form of technical assistance, not necessarily actual loans and money, but technical assistance to do the due diligence and put together the business plan so that they can then go forward and get the financing from be it commercial banks or multilateral banks or the likes. And so we've done this to ensure that financing is reaching down to the ground. And we've done this across the board, not just, of course, with palm oil, although that's a very important value chain to reduce deforestation in Indonesia and Malaysia and around the Southeast Asia region, but also in the coffee value chain and cocoa and coconut. And it wasn't just financing. For example, in the coconut industry, we convened different stakeholders, Barry Callebaut, Unilever, different multilateral and multinational corporations who deal with coconut essential oils or coconut itself. And we brought them together and convened them together in a space to develop a sustainable coconut charter, but also develop a plan, a partnership rather, that they could come together on and share lessons learned on how to scale up sustainable coconut production. And now it's being run by BSR and with a little bit of support from GIZ. So that's the kind of work we've been doing. It's important to infuse this climate resilience within the private sector. Another sector, which you might be surprised that we work in, but is in the artisanal and small-scale mining space. A subsector that is very important for millions of people around the world who are deriving a livelihood from it. A very difficult and unsafe vocation. And so what we've done and have been doing for a long time is working to support their occupational health and safety, to improve occupational health and safety standards. And we haven't really been couching this in terms of climate resilience. But at the end of the day, it is synonymous with climate resilience. We've been developing strategies to reinforce mining structures, for example, ensuring that mines don't collapse and kill lives and reduce the viability of those mines. We've been supporting around drainage, heat protection protocols, but at the same time also supporting around combating child labor in this sector. All ultimately, supporting immediate workplace accidents and workplace measures, but at the same time supporting climate reduction related disruptions. And so it's, as I said, synonymous with occupational health and safety. And I'll give you an example. So we've done did some work in Ethiopia with the Ministry of Mines, who wanted to get more involved in their nascent at the time climate resilience and green economy strategy. And so we were working with them to develop environmental risk mitigation strategies and espousing these occupational health and safety measures for artisanal and small-scale gemstone miners. So you see here on the left side some gemstone miners in the northern mountains of Amhara region in Ethiopia. And again, we weren't couching this in terms of climate resilience per se. It was just good business, ensuring viability of these mines, ensuring the safety of these local communities, which then in turn did, however, ensure resilience in terms of the climate that they are facing. Another area where we work is in with orphans and vulnerable children. Is it turning? Okay, here we go. And this is Eastern Zimbabwe, where we had a project working with occupational orphans and vulnerable children, looking at their health and welfare and livelihoods. And what we noted through a climate change vulnerability assessment is that a lot of the impacts that were brought on this very vulnerable community are not the direct ones in terms of heat stress or increased waterborne or vector-borne diseases, which often do come from climate impacts, flooding and or drought. But in fact, it's a more insipid impact in terms of their stress levels, the trauma that was seen in these local communities and these who had seen their family die from storms. There was a large hurricane Idai that hit Mozambique. And oftentimes these hurricanes would only reach Mozambique, the coastal areas, and never really go inland further into Zimbabwe. But as we're seeing these systems growing bigger and more frequent, they're actually getting further inland and hitting places like Zimbabwe. And so these children were hugely impacted by this, to the point where when there would be another warning for a potential other hurricane or weather system, these children were losing sleep. They would be waking up every hour on the hour, praying to God that they would not be impacted or killed or lose their income from these storms. And that was having an impact on their health. Most of these kids were on antiretroviral drugs for HIV/AIDS. and we were seeing that supposedly the impact on the retention of these medicines, and in some cases, kids not being able to get to the clinics to be able to get their ARVs because they're the rivers were swollen, were flooded, roads were cut off, bridges were broken down. So these impacts were creating some PTSD essentially on these kids, impacting on their education, not being able to actually go to school oftentimes, and having not all these knock-on effects on their system, on their health. So an important piece of the puzzle here is in terms of the mental health, the impacts, and how to make them more resilient. And taking that example from Zimbabwe, what we were also doing was supporting income generating activities, right, to ensure that they had the financial wherewithal to withstand the storm, the literal and metaphorical, the storm that they were facing. And so financial resilience is very much fueling sort of climate resilience, but vice versa. Climate resilience protects that financial resilience. Doing climate smart agriculture makes their food systems that much more sustainable, more resilient to the impacts of these storms, of these droughts, and so protects that financial resilience, their own sort of cash crops or the subsistence crops. But I wanted to provide an example of other work we do in this space around so the financing piece, of access to finance, is in the mini grid system space. So we have a project that we've got quite a few projects around the world, Nigeria, but also in Myanmar, where we are working to develop revolving loan funds, developing village electrification committees that are the interlocutors between enterprises, entrepreneurs, and the mini grid developers. These are companies that are coming in and developing oftentimes solar-powered mini grid systems where there isn't any grid access, or where the grid only provides perhaps 5, 6 hours a day of electricity. But these mini grid systems, of course, they're run as a business and will only work if there is the demand. And oftentimes these local communities don't have the finance to be able to actually pay for the system or buy the appliances to connect to the system. They've been dealing with diesel generated power for so long that their whole system revolves around that. So suddenly you're bringing in a mini grid system that provides electricity, but they need electrical supplies, electrical appliances, sewing machines, ovens, refrigerators, freezers to power their livelihoods and their small enterprises. So we were ensuring that they had connection to financiers, that they knew how to build a business plan that incorporates productive use economics, productive use of energy, to ensure that there's that stimulation of that demand for these mini grid systems to be able to survive. And this is key to the just and clean energy transition. Otherwise, you'll see many of these mini grid developers shying away from these areas because there isn't actually that demand, not for want of trying. Now, as an ecologist, I can't not talk about the nature and ecosystems, not because of my biases, but ultimately because it is also a huge and very important factor and key way to engender resilience in our systems. If we have clean, healthy biomes and ecosystems, then the services that they provide to both our wildlife communities and our local human communities will be strong. And we're talking about strong ecosystems to provide for pollinators that pollinate our crops, strong upland water sheds that will ensure water quality and quantity is good and regulated, that ensures irrigation of our crops downstream, that there's less siltation that will impact on our hydroelectric power plants, so on and so forth. And these are services that are key to essentially our survival, and the obvious one being to store and regulate carbon. So nature-based solutions has been very much in the talks. It even was in COP26. Nature in general, but nature-based solutions. Oftentimes you'll hear nature climate solutions. But ultimately, they're gaining recognition and credence in terms of how to ensure climate resilience for our local communities. The obvious one being, reducing impacts of storms on local coastal communities, but it goes beyond that in terms of their food systems and their and storage of carbon to be able to get those carbon credits in time and a new revenue stream for local communities. And an example here on the left side, the picture is from some work we're doing in Indonesia and East Kalimantan, and that's to do with sustainable shrimp farming. So we're working with actually a local NGO there who is essentially a subsidiary of TNC actually, who have a very strong and evidence-based sustainable shrimp farming model. It's called the Secure model. But again, we all know probably in this room that technology can get us so far, but we have to ensure that take-up of this technology and that they have the understanding and the nuances in terms of business management, financial management to be able to take advantage of the extra revenue that may accrue from this more productive form of shrimp farming. So that's what we've been doing in support with this local entity NGO in East Kalimantan. And also actually integrated rooftop solar systems to support local community, local production group, women-led production group to add value to their products. And again, therefore derive more income from this for a rainy day, literally and metaphorically speaking. So it's a challenge, but one that we've obviously not shying away from. And it's also to ensure that they have the understanding of how to manage those revenues later on, the carbon revenue. So we've been doing a lot of work with the local Bumkam, the village business, to ensure that they understand how to develop a transparent and equitable benefit sharing mechanism for when this revenue stream does come into play. So in short, climate resilience, I mean, I think you're getting the gist here, is more than just building seawalls and planting trees, right? Resilience, and in fact, the reality is climate events are triggers, but the impacts are actually the ones that you see in terms of financial stability, the occupational health and safety, strong food, agricultural systems, social protection networks. These are the things that ultimately will mean climate resilience goes beyond just climate, but really into the health, the energy resilience, the financial resilience. And this is actually reflective of the disciplines that need to be in the room to support the work in this space. We need agriculturalists to support and scale up regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, financial specialists to be able to co-develop these business plans to catalyze this green finance. The rural development practitioners to integrate the climate vulnerability understanding, to assess adaptive capacity, the health specialists to be able to take into consideration not just the direct impacts on health like heat stress and the likes, but really more to understand those insipid elements of trauma. So I know that Terra.do is all about ensuring that we have the new cadre of people working in this climate space, climate specialists. But I would counter that we are all climate specialists at the end of the day, in the way that we bring our own knowledge and skills to the fore. And I'll give you an example of a little bit of my trajectory of how I got here, and kind of reflective of this work, of this need for generalists in a way, and specialists in different disciplines. I'm not a climate specialist. I don't purport to be one. I don't think I ever was one. But I have done some work, and my experiences have brought me to a point where I am able to provide a lot of support to the sector. And it started off, as I mentioned, I'm an ecologist by trade. But after I left there, it was around the same time as the Kyoto Protocol. I did provide my services to the Friends of the Earth Scotland in Edinburgh to write their response to the white paper, UK white paper on UK government paper on climate change. I did similar work with National Wildlife Federation in DC, and this was with their Great Lakes Natural Resource Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan, looking at the issue of mercury deposition from carbon from coal-fired power plants and how it impacts endangered species. My focus there was very much on conservation of endangered species and looking at the drivers of the impact and the degradation of their habitats. So I gravitated towards that. But in time, I did a little bit of work at the World Bank for a couple of years and started to move towards the human development space and marrying it with my environmental interest and conservation interests. To which then, married to a foreign service officer, I've been overseas for a better part of 18 years and doing a lot of consulting work to keep myself busy. And there was garnering, again, different disciplines and interests in fair trade, smallholder farming, environmental impact assessments in gold mining, community-based natural resources management, water sanitation, innovation challenges, you name it. But all of that has brought me to where I am now, being able to take lessons learned from all this to be able to bring it to the climate resilience space. It also helped that I did some work for the climate change knowledge portal at the World Bank, the Africa Bureau, which is now sort of a portal that allows for practitioners to manage design projects with evidence of the needs based on climate change models and the likes. It's a bit of a clearinghouse mechanism to really get an understanding of a particular area and their climate profiles. But the one area where I think the one opportunity that I thought was quite seminal for me in a more strange way was when I worked with Windrock International in Vietnam. So on a USAID project in 2011. And that was looking at, again, a way to bring in finance to support, to reduce the drivers of deforestation in the region. A lot of it as a result of unsustainable coffee production in the highlands of Vietnam. And we did a payment for ecosystem services project, helped develop a whole policy, which is still standing to date, the national policy on payment for forest environmental services, as they called it. And part of that was developing a REDD+ project, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. Very new at the time. In fact, I think the first REDD+ project that was verified was in Kenya in 2011. And I helped shepherd a project from conception to the PDD, the project description document that then goes to get verified. Very onerous process, very technical, but I wasn't doing the technical. We had an ecosystem services team from DC that was supporting that effort. But at the end of that, and closer to the end of the project, that team, a very preeminent team, everyone kind of knew in this space, asked me to be part of their team to do more REDD+ projects going forwards. To which I said, absolutely not. I'm not a specialist in this. Why are you asking me? I mean, to be doing projects in the tens of millions of dollars. I've never been trained in this. I don't have that wherewithal to do this. Surely there must be someone out there who does. To which they said, no. I mean, this is a nascent discipline. Very much, you have that experience because you've done this over the last 6 months. Which is worrying to me, to be honest, but you have to start somewhere. And of course, now this has been taught in classes and universities, and now people have experience to go with that sort of the book smarts. But at the time, there wasn't that. And so in retrospect, I wish I had have taken that opportunity to do that and just taken a little bit of leap of faith. Perhaps it's my British self-deprecation, I don't know, but it was a lesson learned, and one that when I talk to interns and mentoring the new generation, I say don't short sell yourself. I mean, and this goes again with what I've said before in terms of everything that we all have in terms of our skill set might be very limited to a very particular subsector or sector, or seemingly there's no connection to the climate resilience space. There always is, because climate resilience is much more than just climate and climate modeling and carbon assessments. The very technical stuff. We all know that the technology and technical aspects can get us so far. It's the adoption of these tools, adoption of this knowledge, and the scale up of this knowledge that is the most important piece of the puzzle. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years with PACT, trying to build that knowledge at the local community level, I did go to COP26 as a representative of sort of the NGO world, as an NGO observer in Glasgow. But ultimately, that was very high level, and since then I've decided to focus more on sort of the New York Climate Week, the DC Climate Week, the work that is closer to home and closer to the local communities that we work with. Anyhow, with that, I'll stop. But I'm sure there's some questions, be it of this nonlinear climate practitioner's journey or some of the work that I spoke about before, and happy to go back into the slides as needed. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nicole, and I'm happy to field some questions.
Thank you so much, David. That was very interesting, particularly learning your journey and unconventional and so forth. I do have a question as far as what was the catalyst in your life, in your early age, that propelled you on the trajectory to study ecology in the first place?
It's an interesting one, and I think actually Nick will probably remember this from a presentation I did on a passionate session at PAC many years ago. I was always, a keen viewer of wildlife documentaries. I loved watching wildlife documentaries and being taken away to these amazing places around the world, and always wanted to work in that space to support, the conservation of these species and of these wilderness areas. So I did some work with the BBC Natural History Unit and on the life of mammals, right? Where some of these BBC wildlife documentaries, and was quite disillusioned at the time with the lack of conservation messaging. And to which one of the assistant producers said, "Well, when you become a producer, you can make it happen." So, well, thanks for that, but that means in 10, 20 years, we've wasted all this opportunity to be able to provide that messaging to those people in their sofas watching the TV sets. So I said, well, at least I can go one step towards this by doing a degree in wildlife and fisheries management and supporting, the conservation of these areas. So that was the impetus, to be honest. But then well, I have used my degree since, of course, but I did do a master's in water management as well, which strange I forgot to put in my climate journey. But it was all about, the water issue is, the new oil in terms of the commodity that really can create conflict and wars and vice versa, can be a way to bring together communities, as we've done under PACT in many peace dividend projects in the Horn of Africa, for example. So yeah, that's how it came to be.
Great. Thanks for sharing. On that note, given your degree in ecology, conservation seems to be a natural trajectory. Have you worked with colleagues who did not major in a STEM or nature field? How did they break into climate work?
Good question. So, I mean, there's quite a few, but I give the one example of a colleague of mine here at PACT who's since moved on, but worked in the artisanal and small scale mining space, and had also in the past done some work with WWF, but it was all with a focus on artisanal mining. And again, going back to what I talked about in artisanal mining, I did that work with her because she started to see, when she was working with women gemstone miners in Tanzania, we're seeing that that they needed more revenue to be able to make ends meet and to be able to ensure a sustainable stream of revenue that would keep their practice going. But also to do it in a more responsible way, they needed to tap into the climate, the carbon market. And so she got very enthused and much more involved in the climate space than I would have ever expected when she saw that potential benefit for those local communities. So with my help, we developed we've now gotten a consulting group in Tanzania, sorry, to carry out an audit, essentially a carbon assessment of the gemstone mining. And now she's taking that on to do it with the Gemological Institute of America and show that proof of concept to be able to take the whole sector forward and make it that much more sustainable, green, so to speak. So I mean, I think it's touch points where it impacts on the work that they were doing, and realizing that again, like I've been saying it, that they've been doing it all along, this climate resilience, but just not calling it that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll just add too, I think that there is a place in climate for uh, all functions, whether it's coming from a marketing background or a finance or admin. Even in the space that I work in, I intersect a lot with our operations team, so it's much more technical. Or so you know, don't lose hope if you haven't had some concrete experience or education in the nature solutions area. There really is space for all different types of functions. Okay, another question here. What are your thoughts on starting with community engagement to build momentum for sustainability? Being in the DMV area, it's something I'm increasingly interested in testing out. How do you see community organizing and similar tactics fitting into the push to build resilience?
Well, yeah, I think communities at the end of the day, we do all this work for the communities, but oftentimes, at least in the past, the interventions that we would carry out to support these efforts were divorced from what the needs of the communities really were, and the interests and the motivations. And so I'd say it's absolutely instrumental to co-design anything with local communities. That's what we do here at PACT, and ensuring that it's not only evidence-based, but that it's human-centered, and human-centered driven. So that's one aspect of it, but then to center it around their vested interests. At the end of the day, it may be that you would like you see where the ultimate benefit is that goes beyond just this local community, and you're forcing some element of your agenda onto them. But you, at the end of the day, have to work with their expressed needs, and it might be very limited to a very specific aspect. Let's say water issues, water quality or water quantity, and so you have to be able to develop integrated solutions that meet the communities where they are in terms of their sort of their development spectrum, and not cut corners. And this is oftentimes where people get a little bit lazy and antsy and want to get further on in their solution, to take advantage and get that scale. But it only will work if the local communities are bought in fully into whatever solution you bring together. And they will, and the best way to do so is design that solution with them, right? So I'd say that's one key aspect. And the other one is, and this is a lot what PAC does, and I've definitely drunk the Kool-Aid, is that, again, you can have all the technical know-how, the technological know-how, but if these local communities and local community groups don't have the organizational capacity, the institutional capacities to carry out any work, it doesn't matter how much technical and training they do on carbon assessments, for example. If ultimately that entity, that NGO, that community group is gone within a year because they didn't have the financial management understanding, or how to ensure inclusivity in the way they function, ensuring transparent election processes, then ultimately all the investment we put on the technical side will flounder, because these NGOs or local community groups will ultimately wither away because they don't have that institutional robustness. So I think, and this is what and I know the community, at least the conservation world, at least from the UK side, has started to get this. We were asked as part of one of the subcommittees on the World Conservation Congress came to us to say, how can we learn from the work you're doing in this organizational capacity space, in the health space, which is where a lot of our work is, to bring it to bear in the community, in the conservation world, because you're getting these nonprofit groups around the world who have one charismatic leader, who brings in a lot of the funding and interest, but then the minute that they either are, grow old and retire, or actually, as often is the case, unfortunately, are shot and killed, these environmental defenders, they haven't left behind a robust group and NGO to be able to continue the good work. So it's, I think, the building blocks are there. In UK, NGOs have developed capacities for conservation.org to do just that, to help them to understand their needs, their capacities. It's self-assessed. PACT goes beyond that and actually does mentoring and coaching, but it takes time and money. So if you don't have a donor behind it, then you have to, of course, self-assess. So I'd start, that's one area to start.
Great, thank you for that. Another question coming in. I appreciate your framing of climate resilience as everything resilience. To that end, you mentioned that it will take all sorts to address this: agribusiness, rural, agronomists, financiers, etc. How do you convene all these actors and get them to coordinate action and funding to address resilience in a holistic manner at a systems level?
Great question, and indeed one of the bigger challenges. And this is where the likes of, at least back in the day when there was a USAID, we were working with groups within there to look at integrated forms of development. PAC developed a whole coalition called the Locus Alliance to do just this and take lessons learned from different NGOs and groups doing integrated development that takes into consideration all these different holistic aspects, and understanding what M&E framework do we need to put in place to show the evidence, to get more donors involved. And we were starting to get traction with USAID, to be honest. The pandemic, unfortunately, for better or for worse, helped in showing that the One Health and one planetary health view is an important one, because it's all interlinked, right? Zoonotic diseases will come from wildlife into human communities if we don't have the right elements in place. So that's one way to ensure that the donor space is putting out some integrated, holistic type programs rather than very sort of siloed programs that aren't necessarily meeting communities where they are in a way that is ultimately a holistic endeavor. Also, private sector has a big part to play, and so the landscapes that they work in, oftentimes they're very siloed in their value chains, right? If someone's, let's say Unilever is taking palm oil from this one particular landscape, but then you've got all these other private sectors also working with smallholders, and with different value chains, maybe even the same value chains, but working not in concert. So they've come together to have the Forest Positive Coalition, for example, convened by the Consumer Goods Forum. But a lot of the private sector that are part of that are coming together to develop a landscape approach for exactly this reason, to say, okay, well, we can do regenerative agriculture, we can do agroforestry here, and we can bring all our concerted effort together to solve this issue, rather than working at odds to each other, which doesn't help the communities either when they're having to essentially, or local government to have to manage umpteen different projects, who ultimately have the same ultimate goal. So yeah, it's bringing all these different groups. I mean, this is what the likes of PACT and others are doing, is convening multi-stakeholder convening groups together around one theme, but then being able to show that there are other elements to draw from, to bring together into this collective approach and collective impact. But it's a big challenge, because of course at the end of the day there'll always be a race to the bottom to reduce costs, and be able to derive their products in the most economical way, and oftentimes coordination, collaboration is money, it's time, it's effort, and so they'd rather not go that route. But we've shown through sort of these collective approaches, for example, the work with the coffee producers, we developed this a model that shows how to assess carbon in Robusta coffee in Vietnam and Indonesia, working with all the private sector partners together in a pre-competitive basis, and show them the way to do so in an economical way. So it starts with the convening, and requires a neutral body, of course, so there isn't any hint of bias. and vested interest in there. But yeah, no silver bullet there, unfortunately.
Great response. Thank you. Just trying to consolidate. You've shared a lot of information. I want to make sure we're not repeating questions. Can you share an example of a past or current project to illustrate how PACT approaches co-designing solutions with communities? Kind of already gotten into that a bit.
Yeah,
A little more.
but I would say one example. So we were asked by an energy company in Eastern Africa to, and they wanted to do some work in a particular island off the coast of Tanzania. Was it Kenya? Kenya, and it was looking at, so well, what can we do to support these communities? And rather than saying, well, of course, we'll just do a water and sanitation project or support them in terms of mangrove restoration, we said, and again, like I was saying before, we said, well, let's see what do these communities feel is their need? What is material to them? So we did a sort of a materiality assessment in a way, which private sector does a lot of, but we did it through this human-centered design lens to sit down and understand, the lived-in realities of these communities, the different people within those communities. If we only went to the village elders, there'll be vested interests and not necessarily reflective of all the needs of all the different stakeholders in these and vulnerable communities, marginalized youth and the likes, or pregnant women. So we did a human-centered design approach, took a human-centered design approach to develop a project that ultimately did have a much more holistic outcome. So that's one example of how we have taken this human-centered design and community focus to design a program. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But I mean, of course, many other ways. But I think that was the most sort of supercharged one that I can think of.
Great. And to expand on that, well, how do you navigate where community priorities don't necessarily align with funders' priorities or focus areas?
Yes, that is a great question. Often the case. We like to well, what we've tried to do is never get to that point, because we are often co-designing the projects with the donor and the community from the beginning, right? Even the more prescriptive of donors, oftentimes there will be a bit of an inception phase where we're able to sort of tweak the design and be able to ensure alignment with incentives. Um, but but there will be times where it just does not work, and because there are these vested interests, these negative deviants within society, who have ulterior motives and means to just go at it for themselves. So what we often do is develop or carry out a political economy analysis. Often it can be a longer thing or a more short-term, rapid political analysis, or the way we do our work is done through a political economy lens. And that means to really sort of bring to light these aspects, these incentive structures within the communities and local government and even national government, to understand what so we've used it, for example, to understand which ministries do we need to work with. In the case of doing public participation in EIAs in Southeast Asia, we thought, of course, we'll just work with the Ministry of Planning. But no, we also need to work with the Ministry of Finance, who has a big say in this. Also, the Ministry of Environment. And within that, who do we need to work with to ensure that they have the influence to ensure the right flow of information and resources? So we've used political economy analyses and working in a political and thinking, working politically type lens across most of our work now, for this exact purpose, to ensure that we ultimately do align with the majority of the stakeholders and beneficiaries and affected communities in the work that we do. And it's worked wonderfully, but there's always going to be some segment of a population that we might miss, but we like to think that ultimately we are as representative as possible and as inclusive as possible.
Great, thanks for that perspective. Um, Feels like a cliche at this point, but how is AI changing your work, the supply chain and resource management, any novel innovations?
No, yeah, not a cliche at all. I mean, to be honest, as funding is waning in this space, we've been looking at other forms, and in fact, actually, even before this big implosion in our sector, we were looking at AI, but to ensure that AI was working for local communities and not ultimately being another way to collate information, from data sets and from reports, but not really get down and validate that with local communities. So we didn't want it to be a shortcut, as is what most people are using AI for. So we had put together, and this hasn't come to pass yet, but we worked with an AI practitioner who had worked with us on a governance project. I won't go to that, but who to work and develop an AI for affected communities type model to ensure that that yes, the communities are not only sort of the purveyors of the information that goes into a lot of these models, to dictate what can or cannot be done, and to assure the private sector how they are positively impacting along their value chain, but to ensure that they are benefiting from this information as well, that they are validating the information, that they can then actually take from that information themselves and be able to be partners in any intervention on the ground. So we've been looking at that and are looking to find a donor that's willing to look at an AI model like this that's ensuring sort of inclusivity in the work that we do, transparency in the work that we do, but ultimately to reduce the onerous aspect of ESG reporting for private sector, because it's becoming so difficult having to report to 40 different standards and what have you, that they'd rather just not do it. And they can just choose in some cases not to do it, and which doesn't have that benefit for our local communities, for our environment. And so we're trying to make it as easy for them. And so AI was part of that, what we were thinking, part of that tool to get all that information to ensure reporting. And we're starting to see more of that now that AI is being taken up more. So to reduce that reporting burden on ESG commitments.
Thank you. This is a very specific question. Have you seen payments for ecosystem services yet delivered to nonprofit organizations committed to trash pickup and habitat restoration, for example, weed pulling and native planting, looking to see if CBO economics for paying volunteers is feasible?
Yes. So I'll give one example that the South African government had been doing for a long time now. It's called the different models for working for water, working for wetlands, working for that's the name of them. And essentially, they were working to pay community youth and community members to, for example, um, take out invasive species from a particular watershed to improve water quality and water quantity. And in that way, they would get paid. So it's almost essentially cash for work in a way. But then they were using those invasive species to build to construct coffins, for example. And so again, there's sort of an incentive structure there because there's an added value product than just burning the invasive species. They've used this for wetlands. They've used this for other means. And it's essentially a payment for service because ultimately it's the government is benefiting from not having to put that money into increased water treatment plants downstream. And so they are the beneficiaries of this work. So that's one example. I know that yeah, the Vietnam case where I worked on in the past is still going strong, and they are supporting local community-based organizations benefiting from the payments coming from so the Saigon Water Company or their hydroelectric water company, who are benefiting from reduced siltation in their reservoirs, meaning that their reservoir can be viable for longer time rather than either ultimately having to go and put costly dredging or or decommission the reservoir altogether due to siltation. So they are benefiting, and CBOs upstream are getting paid for sustainably managing the forests and reducing the amount of pesticides they're using. So that's happening in real time, and it's nationwide now in Vietnam. So you can check out the PFES policy, Payment for Forest Environmental Services policy. Yeah, I mean, there are many other cases of payment for ecosystem services that work. Of course, they work better in a country such as Vietnam, where it's a socialist democratic country with joint stock companies, where the companies aren't necessarily truly market based. So if the Prime Minister's office says you must pay, he essentially will pay. But the project that we did show the market, reasons, that the data to back up why they needed to pay, and the benefits that they've derived from the ecosystem services.
Excellent. We have so many great questions here. I'm sorry we're running out of time nearing the end. I'll leave you with this. What are you excited about working on now? If you could take on any project now, what would you do?
Huh. Great question. Well, any project. Well, there's one that I've been trying to get off the ground for some time. It's working with a local NGO in Madagascar who is a co-manager of a mangrove protected area. It's co-managed by them and the community and local government. And we've been trying to. There are some big drivers of potential deforestation and there, so mismanagement of the mangroves, for example, for firewood and the likes. So we've been looking at bringing in more a private sector investor to develop a carbon project, and I'd love to get that off the ground. The problem was that the Madagascar government had made a decree on it, that their carbon market would not allow for international investors. And it was partly driven by a World Bank project, but that had put in $500 million in there. But now they've changed that decree. They've opened it up to the international market. So we feel that's ultimately a positive thing to ensure you're getting the full sort of finance streams in there. So excited to see if we can make that work. It's a community that's everything's in place to truly be a successful project with co-benefits, right, in terms of not just carbon as a commodity, but benefits to communities, improved incomes, reduced siltation in the mangrove areas, and it's a beautiful part of the country. So that's one thing I'm hoping to get off the ground, and then also just you get a little bit connected to the communities that you work with, but the Indonesia work we're doing is coming to an end, and if there's one thing I could do, I think it would be to just be able to find more funding to be able to do more work there and scale up the work we've done. Oftentimes, the reality is we're only scratching the surface working with a subset of those communities, and if we could just do this work across the full landscape, perhaps a landscape type project would be the ultimate goal.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for your time, David, and sharing your knowledge and information and all the wonderful things that you're working on that are making impact for our beautiful planet. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your time and attention and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for the questions. I appreciate the time and patience.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.